global networking at scale. 20,000 delegates, 250 panels, sessions, keynotes, themed the next frontier in global finance. You can imagine the title of buzzwords. It was so valuable though. I'd like to share my 3 takeaways with you. First, CBDs are coming. Clarity is not. The tech is racing ahead, but no one agrees what the problem is that we're solving, and more importantly, for who. Second, real time isn't a tech problem anymore. It's a willpower problem. Everyone agrees instant is the baseline. It's the minimum expectation. The infrastructure exists. What's the constraint? Institutional courage. Finally, and most significantly, and why we're here today, AI is without a doubt the answer. We just don't know what the question is. Because if AI really is the next frontier, why does the conversation mostly sound like a cost-saving memo from 2019? We're optimizing margins. We're not rethinking the model. I need to caveat that, and I need to be very clear. If you're expecting perfect answers today, I'm going to apologize in advance. What myself and my guest will endeavor to send you away with is some different perspectives to consider as we get to grips with a world that we're told will be driven by the shift to AI and its very close siblings, machine learning and quantum computing. I want to bring this slightly closer to home. Picture this. It's a warm Sunday afternoon, Johannesburg. Lebo runs a small business making custom canvas. She's shopping for her niece's graduation gift in a market, Mabone. She finds something beautiful, opens her banking app, taps to pay, the screen hangs. Payment failed, please try again later. Lebo scrambles for emergency cash. The moment passes. Something's changed. That wasn't a technical failure. It was a break in trust. And it's an all too familiar story that we've heard so many times. But this is just one story. And if we think about this AI-driven future, what is the future that we are actually preparing for? South Africa is expected to process approximately 600 million real-time payments this year. India will process 300 billion. So we're 1/500th of India. Brazil, as you can see, similarly larger by a factor rather than a percentage. Again, these case studies won't be new to anybody here. And why is India the most accurate comparison? Well, because frankly, we're following the same playbook, just potentially on a more scenic route, taking a longer round trip. We bypassed card dominance entirely, or that's what we're looking to do. And essentially what we're going after is an enormous reliance on low-value cash transactions. We need to adjust the numbers for population if we're going to think about where we're going to get to. India's population is 23 times that of South Africa. So when you go down to how many, Indians are making 208 real-time payments per year. South Africans were still under 10. But this is where it gets interesting if we're going to try and do direct comparisons, is that South Africans on a per capita rate, we should be hitting them 12.75 billion transactions per year. But action, if you adjust for our lower economic growth rate, which it is significantly, and that changes, which it may, we could even be looking at larger. Okay? So when we think about the number of the factor, we're looking at 21 times current volumes. Sure, the timing remains, the wind remains a significant risk. But very quickly, as likely in some shape or form, we will solve for merchant acceptance over and above account-to-account P2P. There is a scenario where over the next 5 years, we're not far from living that world where we put a significant dent in what is, depending on who you listen to, between 95 and 97% of our low volume transactions still being cash. And then in this context, why does AI actually matter? I mean, what does it mean? Yes, the technology is creeping into every single one of our lives. personal, professional, and maybe we need to look at it from the other angle. What if we miss the boat as an industry? What would the cost be of not leveraging the latest fundamental technological evolutions with that future stays in mind? Maybe we should think about it through the eyes of what the public expects. Every South African, each one of us, when we open our apps, we expect it to work. Every single time, instantly, no friction, no failure, no surprises. Basically invisible. And that's just in our cases. We're envisioning reducing the reliance on cash and our number of volumes increasing significantly. We've signed a contract. We've signed a social contract that as our regulation moves us forward, we will be able to deliver on realizing that expectation and on scaling the trust that we've created in making our payment system more accessible, more inclusive, more modern, and more reliable. At 600 million transactions, we are managing that with humans and rules engines. With batches, end-of-day recons, but at 21 times that scale. Look, thank goodness we're not here talking about core banking implications. But the brutal reality is that in a cash system, failure is inconvenient. It's unseen when it's quickly reversed. But in a digital system, it's completely diffuse. It's visceral, visible, and it impacts our trust at an exponential scale, where we have tens of millions relying on these transactions multiple times every single day. So we've scaled our fruit. Most importantly, we've scaled our capability, but we haven't yet scaled our trust. So I challenge then that the real question is, what is the infrastructure and the architecture that AI actually needs to deliver trust at 25 times scale? How are we thinking about putting those foundations in place? And I know that we are. Let's be clear. AI ready and going foundational isn't about optimizing today's systems for tomorrow's incremental growth. Our infrastructure was designed for monthly recon and batch. Marshall Goldsmith, I'm sure many of you will be familiar with some of the things he's quoted as saying, and I know he wasn't intending to talk about payments technology, but his words ring very, very true for me when he said, what got us to where we are won't get us to where we need to be. Do we have the courage to architect for the future we know is coming instead of iterating on the knowns of the past? In fact, I know Adrian spoke about it earlier when he said, are we actually thinking future back rather than our usual institutional mindset of thinking today forward? To help us think through what AI-ready infrastructure actually requires, not in theory, but in practice, I'd like to introduce someone with years of expertise in not only designing and actually building AI-ready enterprise architecture, but in thinking deeply about being future back. Nick Pentreath, please join me. Nick has been referred to as a Rusty Erasmus of AI in enterprise architecture. But by day, before planning for the next World Cup, he's the principal engineer at Rumi.ai, where he leads AI development. And in his prior experience and chapters, he's enjoyed time as principal engineer at IBM, I beg your pardon, and lead machine learning engineering at Tumblr, before also on the side running his own machine learning startup named Graph. If anyone understands what infrastructure AI actually needs at hyperscale, it's Nick. Nick, thanks for your time. If we know that 12 to 25 times scale is coming, and we know current infrastructure probably won't get us to where we need to be, what does AI-ready infrastructure actually require in practice? What are the foundational building blocks?
Yeah. Morning, Anton. Thanks very much for having me here. It's a great honor. The Rusty Erasmus says there's a big shoes to fill. Quite a high bar that you've set. But I'll try to adapt to some of that expectation in terms of setting strategy in this time for AI. So, to think about where the payments industry might need to go, I think it's instructive to take a look at what is happening at the cutting edge in the global technology giants. Now, I've spent most of my career in machine learning and AI building systems focused on recommendation and personalization. And these are some of the earliest and most commercially successful use cases for machine learning and AI. Let's take Amazon, for example. Roughly 50% of their revenue is driven by their AI recommendation system. For a company like Netflix, the leader in global digital streaming, that number is closer to 80%. When running Graph-Flow, we saw figures of between 10 and 40% for our e-commerce cortex. Looking at the internet and social media giants, Google, Meta, the TikToks, their business is completely driven by advertising. And online advertising in turn is almost entirely driven by AI machine learning models. AI is the revenue engine for these companies. But they're technology companies. Why do we care? Does it really matter? Well, let's bring it closer to home to the payments industry. So recently Stripe, a global leader in payments, you may have heard of them, announced that they're taken large language models, LLMs, this is the technology underpinning ChatGPT and other AI tools, and they applied similar techniques and training methods to their vast data set of billions of payment transactions. And the result was what they've termed the foundational model for payments. They took this model and applied it to their business. And for example, they were able to decrease increase the efficiency of detecting attacks on their customers by over 60% almost instantaneously. Now, to put that in context, that is a game that would have taken more than 2 years using their previous toy. So we're talking about real value at massive scale, billions of dollars of revenue, billions of users. And so in this case, improving the performance of these AI models, whether it's fraud, the detection, whether it's recommendations, whether it's customer service, whether it's ad targeting, improving that performance by just a few percentage points can lead to outsized gains in revenue cost savings. So the commonality between all of these is combining cutting-edge models and architecture, deep expertise and domain knowledge, and proprietary data sets that no one else has access to. This is where competitive advantages are not. But it's not just the tech giants that are investing in AI. Gartner estimates that global spending on generative AI will top $1.5 trillion this year. And many hundreds of millions of dollars of that is focused on enterprise applications and services. Now, unlocking value and return from this vast investment is not trivial. In fact, a recent study by MIT found that 95% of generative AI projects fail. What are the key reasons? Firstly, focusing on the wrong use cases. Flashy proof of concepts make for pretty demos, but they don't necessarily translate into automating real pain points. Secondly, poor quality data and lack of access to data. Third, missing governance, monitoring, and feedback groups. And finally, applying generalist solutions, one size fits all, versus specialized niche solutions. So how do we move out of this 95% failure zone? What does success look like? So I believe that a recipe for success in AI strategies has 3 pillars: data, execution, and expertise. So it all starts with data. Data is what underpins all machine learning and AI. Recently, tools like ChatGPT, Gemini, and Copilot have democratized access to the best-in-class AI models. But if everyone has access to these AI models, trained on the world's public data, where is the advantage for you if your competitors can also get access to that? So generic solutions are not going to be enough. The value is in proprietary data, feeding customized solutions. This is one of the few competitive modes that exists in this increasingly digital, homogenized, real-time world. So your unique data is the key that unlocks value. But I believe that the old adage of garbage in, garbage out still applies to data, in particular your own data, despite the fact that these large language models can do a pretty good job of dealing with messy, unstructured data. Garbage in, garbage out. Still a box. So in dealing with your own data and unlocking that value, what are some of the challenges? One of the key ones is data quality. Typically, data is incomplete, it's messy, may not be available. It lives in data silos across different systems, across different business units, and is really lacking a way to centralize and consolidate it all in a usable manner. Regulation and trust requires governance and compliance to keep baked in at the core of systems, but typically this is severely lacking in existing systems. Real-time data capabilities are required for AI in order to perform truly real-time decision-making, but existing systems are typically lacking in real-time capability. And finally, scale. We've talked about the scale that we can expect. Typically, more data fed into an AI system leads to better results if it's high quality. Are your systems ready for that scale? So in order to re-architect data systems to be ready for this, we do, as I said, have to think from the forward back and up from the present forward. So the next pillar is execution. So how do we realize this vision of finding the value that is hidden in plain sight in all of your custom data, your unique data? Well, it starts picking the right use case. We have their flashy demos, proof of concepts. They look good, they demo well, but they don't get past that hurdle to be production-ready use cases that are automating real pain points and providing real value. This is a significant investment in time and money to take these proof of concepts and turn them into real production use cases. That investment has to be focused on the highest value use cases and processes in your business. But how do you know what the highest value is? Well, I believe that what can be measured can be optimized. So it starts with ensuring that you have monitoring, measurement, evaluation all in place. First of all, to figure out what those use cases are, and secondly, to measure what the return on investment is once you actually earn and pick it. Observability is a key requirement in AI systems. Now, this applies for most software systems, but one of the differentiators for AI systems is that they are not determiners. Given the same input, you don't necessarily get the same output. So yes, there is magic in getting a result on ChatGPT and having it synthesize information for you. But you need to have guardrails in place. You need to have observability in real time about what is happening in that system. Firstly, to measure, is it performing? And secondly, to be able to intervene if things go wrong or if errors creep in. And finally, trust. You mentioned trust in AI-powered systems that are increasingly automated and free of human intervention. This cannot be an afterthought. It has to be built in as a foundation from the beginning of the system. And this includes a commitment to transparency, explainability, fairness, and robust security measures to ensure that trust is held and not broken. Now, the customer of the future with the dawn of agentic AI and agentic payments may not even be a human. It could be the interconnected network of intelligent agents. So are your systems ready for this future paradigm? The reality is that the foundational architecture of current financial services and banking systems is just not set up to address these wide range of use cases. It's been built up over years of incremental additions and duct taped together. Biggest system is trying to communicate and failing, typically. So this legacy is really pulling back enterprises from delivering from innovating, whereas and competing with new players coming in without this base and could be more agile or flexible cloud-based systems. So really the future of payments systems and execution has to enable a continuous feedback loop of AI where every transaction is more intelligent and frictionless while maintaining security with compliance to maintain the trust. The final pillar is expertise. Now, I am a technology optimist, and I dislike the term of artificial intelligence. I believe that technology should be leveraged to multiply and amplify human endeavors and human expertise. So I like to reframe this as augmented intelligence rather than artificial intelligence in AI. Now, if you look at advances like ChatGPT, which came on the market a few years ago and have literally changed the game in applied AI, these systems are all built on something called reinforcement learning, human feedback. So the human in this group is key. Yes, there's huge amounts of data, the world's check. Yes, there's advances in technology systems, but the human judgment and evaluation that feeds into that so that you get continuous learning and improvement of the system is the key that has unlocked these advances and the speed of their pulse. So if we think about data as the new oil, this is a terminology that many have used. So if that is true, then generative AI is the refinery. And your deep domain expertise is the cast that puts together the blueprint that allows you to put all these pieces together and get out the highest value output, so the jet fuel for your enterprise. So in addition, AI is never perfect. We know that errors are going to creep in, hallucinations. So human oversight and guidance is critical, both for feeding that feedback loop, making sure that the AI system can continuously learn, but also for catching those exceptions and weird edge cases that need nuance and human action and intervention. So that's my map for success in AI strategy. It's 3 pillars: proprietary, high-quality data that no one else has access to, combined with excellence in execution that is based on solid system fundamentals, and then finally applying deep domain knowledge and expertise that has been built up over many, many, many years of the business, which is core value. Combining all of those 3 things together is where our success in AI assisted impacts is going to be at. Break.
Thank you, Nick. Quite a lot to digest. I'm definitely not a chemist, but I'll be an aspirational chemist. But if I'm now putting myself in the seats and the shoes of our audience, and I'm thinking, okay, so with those sort of first principles in my mind, and I'm going to leave here, what are the things I need to think about doing differently, and maybe, or doing more of? Because I certainly wouldn't imply that, what I've interpreted is not happening. I couldn't be that informed. But I think primarily, if we're thinking about it from a really core perspective, is there needs to be significant thought and resource allocation into next generation tech infrastructure. That's where the focus, that's going to allow us to embed augmented intelligence. I'll challenge myself to not use the arch word, augmented intelligence at the core for the payment operations. And that also sets us up to win at that data game. From a data in terms of being the way accurate and complete, but very much so needs to be consolidated. It needs to be accessible in near real time, which would probably be a big difference to some of what we see today in our legacy heritage architectures and enterprises, in terms of how we're thinking. So that's more like that. That's what practical do, and maybe might guide some strategic thinking in terms of allocation of budgets. But then what I'm also hearing you say is from a mindset perspective, we really need to be AI first, not just plus AI. AI being augmented intelligence. I'll just keep sort of on repetition. And there, the vital thing, and reflecting on some of my takeaways from Cybos is not to default to that, I guess, blanket statement of everyday AI. The magic, the value that we will be able to tell our grandchildren, hopefully one day, will be hopefully around the inference, if I can distinguish between the inference side of AI rather than the everyday side of AI from a productivity improvement perspective. And I think if I'm just reading the same news that I know everybody in the audience is, I'm starting to see this closer to home for us from a payments and a financial services perspective, over and above the sort of newer age tech companies you mentioned. JP Morgan calling out investing $2 billion a year on AI. I didn't inspect the budget lines by item, but I'm sure it's not out by more than 20%. Maybe to pass this back to you, what is your advice to someone writing the strategy for their systems with a view to the next, specifically 5 to 10 years? What should they be telling their board?
Yeah. In fact, and I agree with everything you said, particularly around the AI first and building that in from the base. But it's difficult to potentially think about the AI first when you are dealing with being locked into a lot of waves of legacy systems. So I think there's a few things that piece of advice or thoughts. The first is, we saw how important data is to this solution. And yes, data is all over the place. It's difficult to access. It's messy. But I think that there's no excuse anymore. You can't say as an enterprise, well, you don't have the data, because it's there. Yes, there might be challenges of accessing it, cleaning it up, but it is now. So secondly, it's not necessarily the case that you need to rebuild everything from scratch immediately. So I think that might be where the endpoint is. And I think if we go back to one of the examples I used earlier, Netflix, they were a mail order DVD company, and they rebuilt their entire business to be digital first, or the largest streaming company in the world, but they rebuilt everything from scratch as needed. Whereas Blockbuster doesn't exist anymore. So that shows you what the outcomes can, right? How disparate they can be. But you don't necessarily have to start with a big bang. I think, again, taking a leaf from the world of software development of tech companies, you can start with experimentation and be flexible, be agile. So to pick the highest data use cases that might exist, pick one of them and build out a prototype, invest in that project, show the value, and then start bringing in the rest of the systems, for example. But with experimentation comes a requirement to be willing to fail. So fail fast if things are not working, throw that away, take the learnings, start the next experiment. So I think those are ways that you can move ahead. And the final thought that I have is not just about looking inwards, but to look outwards. So I am also a big believer in open source software and open standards. So I think collaboration is actually key as an industry. Now, this is really difficult in any industry. Certainly financial services are competitive pressures make it challenging. But I think rallying around shared data standards, interoperability, payments interop standards, and really focusing on and trying to lift up everyone together as an industry, even if it might be scary from a competitive perspective. I think that's a key.
Awesome. Thank you. So, in closing, it's probably worthwhile to just reaffirm and remind ourselves that we find ourselves at an incredible once-in-a-generation opportunity with the convergence of 4 significant secular forces that creates a platform and an opportunity for people in this room, people attending this conference in our industry to define what the future of payments will look like. We've got evolving regulation. We've got technological capability that isn't coming. It's already here. We've got all the data to show that the people who this is for, everyday South Africans, are ready from a digital adoption perspective. And then we've heard about what it takes to be AI ready. And I think the final thought is just to mention that in amongst all the challenges and the hurdles that need to be overcome to realize the full potential of this and to be able to scale trust to 12.75 billion transactions and beyond is just to remind ourselves who we are for. Who we are for every single day. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Nick, for your insight and expertise. We've got a few minutes left for questions. I'm petrified of what happens to us, what Jason's going to do to us if we stay longer than the 7 questions. So I'm just going to see what we've got from an app perspective. And if you can just give me 1 second, I'm going to refresh here because I know that I've got some anxious and colleagues who've been waiting for this opportunity. Okay. Nick, We'll be glad to know you're going to take all of the questions.
Good to know. Good.
And I think, look, the first one is something specifically, from a payments, when we're thinking about, you touched on it, the compliance perspective, you emphasize that trust in AI-powered payments systems should be a foundational design principle. Practically, how do we ensure, though, that our AI models don't introduce algorithmic bias, the hallucinations that would be counterproductive to the financial inclusion that we've spoken about as sort of a beacon light?
Yeah, Anton, that's a great question, and yeah, I think it's critical across AI industry at the moment. It's a big focus area and talking point, so it's not just specific to financial services and payments. So I think three things that I like kind of sort of think of as, again, as pillars, maybe, yeah. And the first is, again, data, starting with data. And the second, the explainability, transparency. And the third, again, expertise, humans in the loop. So from a data perspective, ultimately all these models are trained on data. So bias that exists in the data is going to show up in line. It's almost, inevitable. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to address it. So ways that it can be addressed, obviously at the data level, the way we collect it, the way we curate this data, we can ensure that controls are in place, that you're evaluated before it gets put into a training pipeline to make sure that bias doesn't exist. So that's one mode. We are obviously in control of our data or in control of the trade. But most of the time we're not. We are relying on vendors, we're relying on ChatGPT, etc. So there, I think, again, from a data perspective, monitoring becomes really, so monitoring what the outputs are, having systems in place to figure out, what was the output from from this algorithm, and having ultimately humans take a look at that and say, okay, is there bias in there? What needs to be corrected? And that could be potentially corrected through your custom data or through custom prompting, guardrails, etc. And that is part of explainability and transparency. So at the same time that we should be monitoring as humans what the output of the systems are and figure out at catching cases when there's bias. And addressing them, we should also be able to explain why a prediction was made, why a decision was made in a critical system, why or in a fraud system. We should be able to very clearly point to what prompted that decision, what were the inputs, what is the model output. And again, it's all about observability. It's all about having good systems in place to be able to check for tires on those outputs and have humans take a look and make sure that it is unbiased. And if it is biased, to be able to very quickly raise the flag and address that in a very efficiently automated manner. So I think we're not there as generally even as an AI industry right now, let alone in financial services, but that's got to be the goal.
Thank you. One final one, and then I can see Jason's region was fun. We have spoken a little bit about sort of future back in states, and maybe the biggest challenge facing some of us in the room is not the what, but the how. And given that most of us in reality are still relying on complex legacy/heritage systems, where do we actually begin to implement an AI first strategy without, complete multi-year core evolve?
Yeah, again, good question. And we touched a little bit on this in the presentation, of course, but I think starting is one of the things that has to happen. It's very easy to say, those challenges are too great. We don't know where to start. So starting is the first thing. Picking high-value use cases. So figuring out, okay, well, where is there a use case or a process where you are likely to be successful? And what is the criteria there? Well, typically something where there's a lot of human intervention that could potentially be removed. So friction and slowing things down where it could be automated with an AI system. Or where the decision making has to happen at such a tight timescale in instantaneously in real time, whereas you get chemical pinball. These are some of the processes that can be significantly enhanced with AI. Picking the right use case is the starting point. From a data perspective, again, it all starts with data. So starting some ways by getting centralized data silos or pulling them out of data silos, getting to centralized places, starting to work on that interoperability, that access layer. So it doesn't necessarily mean that all legacy systems need to be thrown out, but instead a kind of compatibility layer could be built between different systems, really an API layer, right? Like serve as a central router between all these legacy systems, kind of hide them away, so to speak, but allow your AI system to have access to a clean, centralized, well-governed, documented repository. So those are two areas, or two kind of aspects that I'll think about. And yeah, it doesn't have to be big guys. It can start relatively small, but it has to be high value enough to show value and show ROI. Yeah. Sure.
Thank you, Nick. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of our time slot. Thank you very much. And I've got two final things. One, we'd love to chat a little bit more to you. Please join us up at the Electrum coffee stand at some point over the next 2 days. I promise you, this is an international payments conference. So we've combined some of the finest blends in Arabica coffee that you could possibly imagine. And if you feel differently, I'd love to hear about it. But finally, on a slightly more serious note, if you feel like we missed any thoughts or key points or insights here, we'd also love that. I personally would absolutely love that feedback. So look forward to seeing you over the next couple of days. Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah.